You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 29th of April, 2025 on Monocle Radio.
It has only been 100 days. Donald Trump's whirlwind return to the White House. Russia and North Korea finally acknowledge their alliance, and Donald Trump wins another election in Canada. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Tina Fordham and John Everard will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll speak to Tom Phillips about his new book reflecting on centuries of failure to guess which date will be the world's last. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global Foresight, and John Everard, formerly British ambassador to Belarus, Uruguay and North Korea. Hello to you both.
Hello there.
Hello.
Tina, first of all, welcome back to the show after an absence, some of which you have spent, as I understand it, in a castle.
Yes, I recently revisited Arundel Castle. I took my son during the Easter holidays to explore our nation's past.
I'm speaking as somebody who is quite fond of a castle. I have been able and lucky enough to stay in a few. Where would you rate Arundel Castle? Is it worth visiting?
Oh, I think it's right up there because it's not only the outside, it's the inside. It's got furniture, libraries, and of course the aristocratic family still live there, and that adds another element. It's also interesting to me that they're a Catholic family, and that is something that's very prominently displayed as a Catholic myself. Photos of the now late Pope and previous popes everywhere with the family, and my son, who's doing history A-level, was able to go behind the velvet rope. So there's a lot to be said for a train holiday close to home. And plus we did a bit of wildflower spotting because it's bluebell time.
Indeed it is. John, you have recently been somewhat further afield. Did you, by way of furnishing us with a seamless link, stay in a castle at any point? Or failing that, see a bluebell?
I saw lots of bluebells. So
Excellent.
Bluebells, yes. Castles, sadly, no. Yes, you're right. A little further afield. I've just come back from a kind of collective nail-biting session in South Korea, a big conference where the South Koreans are trying to work out where they go from here. I mean, it's tough on them. Trump is tough on all of us. I think we're about to talk about that. But they, on top of all this, have got the North Koreans pointing missiles down their throats. And, of course, they've just had to impeach their president and are in the middle of a very messy, very acrimonious election campaign. Nobody quite knows how this is all going to fall out. Add to that the fact that their economy is starting to stutter quite badly, and you can understand these guys are getting a bit nervous.
A couple of themes there to which we shall return, and we start in the United States, which as of today has just 1,362 more days of Donald Trump's second presidency to survive, which is to say that he has now passed the celebrated milestone of 100 days. Before being sworn back in, Trump promised the, quote, most extraordinary first 100 days of any presidency in American history. And on this promise, he has arguably delivered, inasmuch as Max Pruss, captain of the Hindenburg, is remembered for the most extraordinary docking of any Zeppelin in airship history. Tina, how are you enjoying it so far?
It's quite a spectacle. I mean, in the olden days, we used to have the first 100 days as a kind of a report card for an American president and had he delivered on his promises. But this time we have the flooding the zone and the bewilderment. I spent my morning with a group of current ambassadors and business leaders here in London trying to talk through not just the first 100 days, but the next 100 days. A lot of them had been at the IMF World Bank spring meetings, where uncertainty was the watchword. But for Americans, if you look at the state of U.S. public opinion, and I think this is something that's really important to see, Donald Trump's ratings are now underwater quite significantly.
Yeah, he is the second least popular president after 100 days ever recorded, exceeded only by Donald Trump the first time round. What does that tell us, John? Is there the... Tina mentioned the concept of flooding the zone, and it has been desperately difficult to try and keep up with everything that has gone on in the last 100 days. But is there possibly a sense among even perhaps some Americans who voted for him that this has all been a bit much and a bit fast?
Amongst some Americans voted for him, yes, but not amongst many. One of the most striking things about this is how his support is held up in his own base. I mean, he's losing support at the margins. The people who voted for him in some of the swing states might regret it. And he quite evidently doesn't really care. He's created a situation in which you can dislike Donald Trump as much as you like. You can protest, you can demonstrate, you can throw paintballs, whatever. It doesn't matter. The man is, at the moment, is almost impregnable. And he's got a charged on with his agenda.
The bond market comes along.
No, even the bond market. The way the bond market would affect Donald Trump would be to push up inflation, which would erode support further. So what? Who's going to stop him? You actually need a mechanism for translating popular discontent into active political opposition on the Hill and halting executive orders. I don't see that. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
I have to take some issue with that as someone who works in the financial markets. I think it was the reaction in U.S. Treasuries and even, making a link to the Canadian elections. Reportedly, Mark Carney, who has now won the election, threatened during a phone call with Donald Trump to sell Canada's U.S. Treasury holdings. If China threatened to do that, we would also be having a very different conversation. So amongst market participants and Wall Street, which has become much more wary of President Trump, there is a lot of anxiety. And so that, to me, is going to be more of a forcing mechanism than the Republican Party or Capitol Hill, at least until midterms.
John, to pick up your earlier point, it is very hard to focus on any one thing because, as we've been discussing, there has been a whole bunch of stuff. But holding that whole bunch of stuff together, do you detect any sense of a program, a philosophy, an ambition, or are they basically just winging it?
No, this is a program. This is something on which a lot of right-wing conservatives have worked for a very long time. What the confusion is caused not by the lack of coherence of the program, but by its rather curious marriage with Donald Trump, the man, the showman, the one who will do almost anything for a television moment. To take Tina's point, tariffs. I mean, Donald Trump has talked about tariffs now for a very long time, decades rather than years. And a lot of conservatives have argued that tariffs are the way to go if you want to protect American industries and to fight off, as they would see it, unfair foreign competition. But the way you would do it in a rational world would be to warn foreign competitors that you are going to introduce a crawling peg, that the tariff on their import is going to go up by 1 percentage point every 6 months until you reach a deal that deals with issues that concern you. You do not go in front of the television cameras and announce stonking tariffs on across the board on a lot of places that nobody's ever heard of. That is what has caused the confusion and a lot of the damage. But coming back to Tina's point, yes, the bond markets are riled. The dollar continues to slip. And I'm sure that this is going to hurt a lot of Americans. Again, how is this going to actually stop Donald Trump? I see no sign of it.
Tina, in search of, I guess, enthusiasm for the 100 days, I did tune in earlier to Fox News briefly. They were touting such accomplishments as, and I quote, the declassification of the JFK files, the ending of federal support for paper straws, and ending production of the penny, which I don't necessarily think threatens the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt greatly. But when you analyse these 100 days, and especially when you talk about it to people such as you were talking to this morning, the ambassadors, business folk, etc., is there anything that looks like a success on its own terms, like a thing that Donald Trump said he was going to do that he has now done that maybe has kind of worked in some positive way?
Well, let's think about what our metrics are. And I look at data, hence the public opinion ratings being underwater is meaningful. He's still popular with his MAGA base, but remember, like any revolutionary movement, he's got a coalition of supporters. He's also seen some of his acolytes, like Elon Musk and the tech right, really fall out of favor with the MAGA right. And so we have some warring factions. I think Donald Trump is best understood as an imperial president who is surviving or won because of the support of a group of competing revolutionary actors. And we know from history that revolutions do tend to eat their young. I can also share that I'm being flown to America and talking to U.S. corporates now on a regular basis to discuss how the rest of the world sees the U.S., because this too is bewildering. And look at that drop-off in travel from Europe to the U.S. It's down 30%. Americans are very confused by this.
Well, just a final thought on that subject, John, before we move on. Do we yet understand what, I guess, how America's role in the world has changed?
Yes. I mean, it's been set out in gory detail. Quite a lot of the problem is not confusion. It's very clear messaging that everybody's trying very hard not to hear. Firstly, America becomes expansionist. We will expand our borders, said Donald Trump. He's entirely serious about Greenland and about Canada. He's also made very clear that America is no longer going to underwrite anybody else's war. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen, I suspect that before much longer, we will see it in a cutting back of American bases overseas. That Donald Trump's vision is Fortress America, Fortress North America, so a much larger United States than we have now, and the rest of the world can go hang.
Well, to Russia now, and official, if belated, confirmation that North Korean troops have been participating in Russia's 72-hour lightning conquest of Ukraine, now in its fourth year. Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a statement describing the North Koreans as, quote, heroes who gave their lives for Russia and for our shared freedom. And a reminder at this point that among the freedoms not enjoyed by anybody in North Korea is the freedom to leave it, except in the context of being press-ganged into a pointless war 7,000 kilometres from home. North Korea's state news agency KCNA, meanwhile, extolled again, quote, the highest strategic level of firm militant friendship between the two countries. John, stirring stuff, but why wait until now?
Yes, big question. Why the timing? There are two big theories on this. One is that this is all somehow to do with the ceasefire, the peace negotiations, that Putin is trying somehow to play a North Korean card, perhaps offering the Americans a withdrawal of North Korean forces from the battlefront in exchange for some other concession elsewhere in the deal. We don't know. That's speculative, but it might well be the case. The other is that this is actually all about May the 9th, the big parade, victory of fascism, and that we are going to see North Korean troops in that parade, for which, of course, you've got to admit and need to be proud of the fact that they have been fighting the Ukrainians.
Tina, did the act, or does the act of inviting the North Koreans to participate in this make Russia look a bit feeble or kind of undermine Russia's image generally?
It's a striking thing to do because remember that Putin has been saying that Ukraine is fighting a proxy war and making a lot of NATO and his encroachment, Russia's encroachment by NATO forces, and then actively invites in a foreign army. And so the point about Victory Day is a really interesting one, having lived in Russia for some years. This is the biggest holiday of the year, really, May 9th. And President Trump reportedly accepted an invitation. I do wonder if that will actually take place.
He does enjoy a parade.
He loves a parade, and I can imagine the sight of tanks, rolling across Red Square would warm his heart in a perverse kind of way. There's an awful lot of what we call signaling and international relations theory going on. But the footnote on the North Korea story that interested me was that in in addition to being press ganged into service, North Koreans had never been able to use their phones and were reportedly gorging on porn while they were in the field fighting, which is a very strange side effect, I suppose, of a taste of relative freedom.
John, do we understand yet quite who it was the North Koreans sent? By Ukraine's estimates, perhaps 3,000 of them have died fighting in Kursk Oblast. More conservative estimates do put the casualties in at least the hundreds. But were North Korea sending, their very best, or was this more hapless cannon fodder who they wouldn't much miss if they didn't come back?
No, these were special operations forces. These were creme de la creme. And yes, an awful lot of them have died. The Ukrainians are saying 4,000 killed or injured. The South Korean National Intelligence Service says something like 300 killed, 2,700 injured. So they've taken terrible casualties. We don't know how many went. You get estimates of around 12,000. Some people claim 15. But the fact that they are special operations forces poses a big political problem to Kim Jong-un. You see, these are people from good Pyongyang families. These are not villagers from somewhere out of the northeast, and these are people who have got influence. You cannot simply return them maimed and damaged to their families without an explanation, which is another reason I think that they have come clean about the war. In the full North Korean statement, they've said that they are going to put up a monument to these people, that these people are heroes, and that they will be honoured. This is important. It means that the North Korean regime no longer has to hide the fact that they've got so many wounded soldiers around. These people can be returned to their families in whatever state they are. The families will be fully honoured, and everybody understands what's happened. It takes the North Koreans off the political hook.
A concern, because there are several concerns here, Tina, is what North Korea is getting in exchange for their troops from the Russians. Is anybody any the wiser about that?
Weapons, I think. Aren't they? I think North Korea, Pyongyang is supplying Russia with weapons.
But in the opposite direction, what is North Korea's angle here? What do they get from Russia? Is it a question that they get to feel like they are a legitimate nation and part of an alliance?
Part of the friendship without limits effect. I think the former ambassador might have another theory. I think it's a bit of a rough deal for North Korea, I have to say.
John, is it clear what they're getting out of it yet?
We know there's a great deal of grain coming in. We've been watching the ships coming through. A great deal of oil. We've seen tankers. And we think also a lot of food. There may also be, should we call them intangible benefits? The North Koreans, for example, just 2 days ago, launched a very smart, very modern-looking heavy destroyer. They haven't been able to do this before. And military experts are saying it's most unlikely that they worked out how to do this without an awful lot of Russian military assistance.
Well, to Canada now, and one of the most astonishing reversals of electoral fortune on record. As recently as January and the announcement of the resignation of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, any bookmaker would have allowed you to write your own ticket on Canada's Liberal Party being returned to office. They were miserably unpopular, and their Conservative rivals were polling so far ahead that they could surely not lose, so long as they made it to Election Day without leader Pierre Poilievre punching a moose. Enter US President Donald Trump and his wittering about absorbing Canada into the United States. Trudeau's successor as Liberal leader, Mark Carney, will be the new Prime Minister, and Pierre Poilievre, having lost his seat along with the election, is unemployed. Tina, is this just about Donald Trump and the 51st state and Governor Trudeau, or does Mark Carney have appeals beyond that?
Well, thinking like a political scientist, the proximity of the announcement of Trump's tariffs against Canada and the shift in opinion polling does suggest a pretty strong case for correlation. It also, there was a change of candidates. So remember that Justin Trudeau was extremely unpopular. But Mark Carney is the embodiment of the globalist, kind of centrist dad, if you can say, former Bank of England governor. And so his victory really puts Canada and what's happened in Canada in response to the Trump tariffs and how they've united Canadian people into a different context. And remember that Canada will host the G7 this summer, and we will have the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz there also, and both of them have said on the record in their various ways that the U.S. might be a hostile actor. So this is a new chapter when it comes to these kinds of international gatherings.
Is there, John, possibly the beginnings here of some sort of backlash against Trump outside the United States? Because Australia is shortly to vote in a general election as well, or federal election as we call it in the old country. And it has been noticeable that the incumbent Labour Party's fortunes have improved the more they have managed to stick our Conservative Party, who are rather confusingly called the Liberal Party, as Trumpist headbangers.
The start of a backlash. I think the backlash is well underway. I mean, Mark Carney wasn't mincing any words off the campaign trail.
He was not.
And I doubt if the Australian politicians will be any more polite. But it's not just in Australia and Canada. I mean, across the world, you're seeing people say things about the United States that would simply have been inconceivable before the 20th of January. The world is furious, and you can understand why.
Is there any chance, do you think, Tina, and possibly even to ask the question is to answer it, that Donald Trump gets the message and drops all this stuff about the 51st state? Because clearly Canadians, many of whom are Conservatives, and many of whom, as recently as January, appeared perfectly prepared to elect a Conservative government, really don't like the 51st state stuff.
Well, unsurprisingly, it doesn't even play well in the United States, by the way. It isn't as though, I mean, he didn't campaign on Canada as the 51st state or annexing Greenland, nor was there any mention of the Panama Canal. So these are coming from Trump's fevered, President McKinley influenced 19th century manifest destiny imagination. And that's the period that he likes to refer to with his tariffs. So he doesn't get much mileage out of that. But remember that Trump loves to float trial balloons and see what the reaction is. He did post on Truth Social a really inflammatory message the day before the elections, kind of suggesting that every Canadian should vote for Poilievre. That didn't transpire, but he has been much nicer to Mark Carney than he ever was to Justin Trudeau, who he, repeatedly kind of undermined by referring to him as governor.
But just finally on this one, John, that challenge is not over. Mark Carney, as now elected Prime Minister, will still have to learn to live with it, as indeed will the entire rest of the Western Alliance. But for Canada in particular, does it have... Obviously, it can't move geographically further away from the United States. It's literally right there. But can Canada pivot more towards Europe?
Yes, it can. In fact, Carney has been talking about this already. I saw that just before the election, somebody cheerfully suggested that Canada should actually join the EU, which I think would cause a certain script flushing amongst the dovecots in Brussels. But a close relationship with Europe, a close relationship perhaps with other big markets, would be the logical next step for Canada as it slowly disconnects from the United States.
Well, to Taiwan now, which may shortly be enjoying an influx of bargain-hunting American holidaymakers, at least if the counsel of one attention-seeking corporate entity is heeded. In keeping with the Daily's usual miserable, petty and spiteful policy on such matters, said attention-seeking corporate entity will not be named. If they want advertising, by golly, they can pay for it. But for what it may be worth, they have declared Taiwan the cheapest place in the world to travel, citing an absence of visa fees, cheap and efficient public transport, and outstanding food at reasonable prices. Tina, first of all, speaking as someone who has been to Taiwan once, though it was a long time ago, I can vouch for all of that. I don't recall having to pay for a visa. The public transport is spectacular, rather, and costs very little, and the food is marvellous. Would you take a holiday in Taiwan?
It wouldn't be at the top of my list, but maybe that's because as a geopolitical strategist, I tend to think of Taiwan as a hot spot that is in China's sights and might cause an international conflagration. So I bet the food is great, but it wouldn't be my top 10.
John, would you, or indeed have you?
Yeah, yes and yes. It's a great place, Taiwan. For the food is out of this world, particularly outside Taipei. The regional cuisine, you can wander down any of the streets in Tainan or Taichung, and people will sell you the most amazing food for almost nothing. You can pig out, which is one of my favourite activities in any country. The other thing is that Taiwan is not just cheap, the food's delicious, all that, it's exotic. If you get into the Taiwanese countryside, you have sort of cross-cultural experiences that are frankly very difficult to find in a lot of other Asian countries. There's so much of Taiwan that of course, everything's changed because the 21st century hit Taiwan like everything else. But the culture, the society hasn't really moved on for many, many, many years. And you get a real sense of what China must have been like back in historic times.
I have fond recollections, John, of a restaurant, I think it was in Taichung, which was exclusively pumpkin themed. This place had been established by somebody whose thing was clearly pumpkins. Like everything, the interior decor was all pumpkin coloured. Everything on the menu pertained to pumpkin in some shape or form. And even speaking, Tina, as someone who frankly doesn't much care for pumpkin, I enjoyed the evening thoroughly. I was swept up by their enthusiasm for the pumpkin. We did want to broaden this out somewhat, however, to talk about bargain destinations more broadly, and if there is anywhere that you think of as an underpriced, undervalued place that people should snap up before everybody else notices.
Well, I'm heading to Montenegro this summer with my family, which has incredible scenery.
It does.
And it's on the Adriatic, medieval Orthodox churches. I think affordable or non-inflated. I'm also always drawn to places that Instagram isn't interested in. And so Portugal is always on my list as a Portuguese American, but Lisbon is very much, very, very, very Instagrammed. And so I would head down further to the Alentejo coast and the Pacific coast. Very wild and very rocky. I'm also a fan of Lithuania. Vilnius, I think, very underappreciated. Fantastic art and architecture, and the beer is still under £1.
Yeah, absolute hard agree on Vilnius, as regular listeners will be aware. John, is there anywhere you would pick?
Cuba, every time. I mean, it is cheap to the point of being embarrassingly cheap. The people are very friendly, and it's a country that's on the cusp of fundamental change. As you walk around talking to people, and it's very hard to go to Cuba without having all kinds of conversations. These people just talk and talk and talk. You can sense the place is actually falling apart, that we're looking at the end of a regime, that the country faces problems to which Havana has simply got no answers. And I think going to Cuba now would be a fascinating experience. And the food's good too.
Well, on that constructive thought, John Everard and Tina Fordham, thank you both for joining us. Finally, very finally, on today's show, people have been predicting the end of the world for centuries, and as of this recording, nobody has been right yet. As a new book by Tom Phillips, A Brief History of the End World demonstrates, however, this unrelenting failure and the considerable associated embarrassment has not halted a steady procession of cowl-clad, scythe-toting Jeremiahs stepping up to take their crack at calling the apocalypse. I spoke to Tom earlier and began by asking him to name his favourite doomsday prophet.
Ooh, it's a good question, that. I cannot condone what she did, but I am so I wouldn't say fan, but I think that Mary Bateman, the owner of the Prophet Hen of Leeds, is one that sticks in my mind, certainly. Miss Bateman, if you are unfamiliar with the tale, she had a hen which laid an egg that had the words "Christ is coming" on its shell, and she took this to be a sign of the end times coming very soon. The hen subsequently laid a couple more eggs which also had that on the shell, and she decided to spread word of this prophecy by charging everybody a penny a time to look at the eggs. It was subsequently discovered that the inscription was both written in ink and also that Christ was spelled wrong, which you probably wouldn't expect from a divine intervention. It turned out that what she'd been doing is simply writing putting it on the eggs herself and then, how to put this delicately, reinserting them into the unfortunate hen and waiting for them to be laid another time.
There is no way to put that delicately, unfortunately, and one can only sympathise with the poultry while admiring her enterprise. It does prompt the question of why people do believe this obvious nonsense, which I do want to come back to, but sticking with the subject of the doomsday prophets, and your book is, among many other things, a sort of history of the trade from Zoroaster to the present day. Did you come down on a line about where the proportion is of the actual sincere and or delusional doomsday prophet versus your just out-and-out honking grifter?
I mean, I think that actually most of them are probably sincere throughout history. You see the certain level of fervour and certainty that accompanies it. I think that, as is the case with an awful lot of people, there is the line between do you believe it yourself or are you just using it to get ahead is actually a lot blurrier than we often think. I mean, you see this about, with con artists, for example. They will very often come to effectively believe their own lies. And so I think it's a blurry line, but honestly, I really do think most apocalyptic prophets really do quite sincerely believe in the truth of what they're saying.
I mean, it is interesting, though, then, why people believe it, because if you talk about why people believe most con artists, it's understandable enough. The con artist is promising to make them wealthy or make America great again or whatever it is the con artist is promising, but it's something alluring. It's something that a reasonable person could want. These people are promising the absolute end to everything, you included, and yet there does seem to be a ready audience for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really one of the main questions why I wanted to write the book, was to answer that question for myself. And I think it really comes down to the fact that we are a species that tells stories. That's how we make sense of the world. And a story isn't a story without an ending. And so really what we're looking at when we see people believing in the end of the world, the imminent end of everything, what they're actually believing in is the end of their world. It's about change, really. It's a dramatic narrative amplification of all their hopes and their fears about change in the world as it is.
Is it also possibly an amplification of, I guess, the most dramatic change that can occur to any of us, that change from being alive to not alive? And one of the sort of anxieties or regrets often voiced by those who are terminally ill and who know the end is coming is that they struggle to reconcile themselves with the fact that this will all continue without them. The party will be ongoing. Is there kind of perhaps a sort of even selfishness at work here? People sort of thinking, well, if I can't have it, then nobody else can.
I think there is that, but there's also, you've got to remember that for many of the people who've most fervently believed in the end of the world throughout history, they don't think it's going to be the end for them, because almost all of the stories have involved basically a small group of select followers, people who know the truth, will be preserved. Almost every apocalypse has a post-apocalypse after it, in which the true believers will be rewarded in the new world that is to follow. And so in many ways, it's exactly what you say, but it's the other way around. It's everybody else who didn't believe us, who mocks us, everything about the world that we consider unfair and unjust will fall away, and then everything will be okay afterwards.
Is it different, though, from other cultish or conspiracy-type beliefs? Because it does seem in a lot of your tellings as susceptible to the sunk costs fallacy. Once you've got people on the hook to an extent, they will tell themselves anything in order to buttress the original thing they fell for. I mean, there's several examples in your book of somebody announcing that the world will end on this time, on this date. A crowd of adherents, perhaps dressed in purple robes, turn up. It doesn't happen. The doomsday prophet says, whoops, sorry, clearly I'll go back and have another look at the maths. He reappears and says, actually, it's a week on Tuesday, and everybody gathers at the foot of the hill again.
Well, exactly. And this is one of the most fascinating things, how these groups sustain the belief after they've been proven wrong. And indeed, why the idea of the apocalypse has sustained itself through thousands of years of history when, touch wood, at the time of recording, it has so far never been right.
And if it has, by the time this is broadcast, nobody will ever know.
Well, this is the comforting thing about it is, if I write in my book, the world isn't going to end, I can only ever be proven right. No one's going to come after me if I was wrong about that. But yeah, no, it is a really interesting thing, the sort of rationalizations that these groups come up with about why they weren't wrong. And I think it's really, really important to realize that it's because this fulfills an emotional need at its heart. It's not actually about a logical conclusion that you arrive at. It's about what you feel. And for many of these people, what actually attracts them is the group. It is the fellow feeling. It is the community that they discover. It's a weird thing to say that, cutting yourself off from society and building a bunker in Montana is somehow a community act, but it is. They really find this sort of sense of community when they do this. And you'll do almost anything to kind of maintain that. You can rationalize away an awful lot if you've got some close friends around you who are agreeing with you.
I mean, your book does note, and it's not surprising, I guess, that the dawn of the atomic age in 1945 did prompt something of a renaissance in apocalyptic thinking, because it was now clear we literally could do this. It is within our capabilities to destroy our civilization, and that had not been true before. But to frame a similar observation, I guess, against a more recent, rather, global trauma, did you get any sense that in the 4 or 5 years since the COVID pandemic, there's been, again, an acceleration in apocalyptic thinking?
So it's interesting. I think it may be a little bit too early to say with any certainty whether or not this has led to an upsurge in it. I think what you see is sort of a lot of the cultural things that go alongside outright apocalypticism are kind of on the rise, which is basically a belief that it's fine to burn everything down. The world as it exists is no longer sustainable, and therefore it will inevitably come to a crisis point. These kind of beliefs are really, really key and really underpin an awful lot of apocalyptic belief. And so I do think that in the culture you see an awful lot of people who've kind of gone from sort of being society skeptical to being outright opponents of anything that resembles the continuation of the status quo.
I mean, do you see elements of that in what I guess we might think of as the accelerationism of the tech bro tendency in particular, who do seem, well, some of them at least, to be urging society towards some sort of reckoning with Lord knows what?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you wanted publicity for my book. I mean, the fact that Peter Thiel wrote an article in the Financial Times just a few months ago in which he heralded the second term of Donald Trump as being an apocalypsis in the sense of the original ancient Greek. I'm fairly sure Peter Thiel does not speak ancient Greek, but, whatever. But yeah, no, there is this really, really clear cultural movement, especially among elites, to believe that this seems like the end in some way and to almost be encouraging in, as you say, this sort of accelerationist way, the movement towards the crisis point. And of course, they're all building their private apocalypse bunkers. And they very clearly staked out their claim on it is going to happen and we're going to be the only ones who survive. Some of the bunkers that they're building are absolutely insane. One of them has got a fire moat so that you can repel any non-billionaires who might try to get in. And so there is this strange sense that in many ways you don't need to believe in the apocalypse yourself. If powerful people believe in the upcoming apocalypse, there's not necessarily much you can do about that.
That was Tom Phillips speaking to me earlier. Tom's book, A Brief History of the End of the is available now. That's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Tina Fordham and John Everard. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.